Orlan Vexley had built an empire, but nothing in his world of power and control prepared him for the moment he locked eyes with Kieran Myrick, a boy who looked unsettlingly like him. The resemblance was undeniable, a mirror of the past Orlan had long buried. But when he discovered the boy's mother was Celeste Myrick, the woman who had vanished from his life 17 years ago, the truth became even more chilling. As he searched for answers, a darker mystery unraveled. Celeste had been running, hiding from someone far more dangerous than Orlan ever imagined. And now the past was coming for them all. Orlan Vexley had spent decades building an empire, a name that commanded both admiration and fear in the world of technology. He was a billionaire whose life seemed perfect on the surface, limitless wealth, power, and influence. But behind the pristine image was a man who kept himself isolated, uninterested in relationships or family. He had no wife, no acknowledged children, and a past he rarely revisited. It was at an exclusive charity gala in New York where the first crack in his controlled world appeared. The ballroom was lavish, filled with the city's elite, their laughter, and conversations blending into a meaningless hum. Orlan attended out of obligation, exchanging polite nods and brief conversations before retreating to a quiet corner with a glass of scotch in hand. That was when he saw the boy. The moment Orlan's gaze landed on him, an unsettling chill spread through his chest. The boy was tall for his age, with a lean but athletic build, dark hair slightly tousled, and sharp blue eyes that cut through the crowd like ice. There was something eerily familiar about him, not just in the way he looked, but in the way he carried himself. It was the posture, the quiet confidence, the way he observed the room instead of getting lost in it. Orlan knew that stance well. He had once been that boy. He watched as the teenager spoke with a few guests, his expression measured, polite, but distant. People naturally gravitated toward him, yet he never fully engaged. Orlan's fingers tightened around his glass. It was like looking into a mirror reflecting his younger self, a version of him from years ago, before success hardened him into the man he had become. Curiosity twisted into something deeper, something far more unnerving. He turned to a passing waiter and motioned toward the boy. "Who is that?" His voice was low but firm. The waiter followed his gaze and hesitated. "That's Kieran Drayden, sir. His mother is Celeste Myrick." The name struck like a bolt of lightning. Celeste Myrick, a name he hadn't heard in 17 years. His grip slackened, and for the first time in decades, Orlan felt genuinely unprepared for what lay ahead. Celeste had been part of his life before he became the man the world now knew. She was with him when he was just starting out, when he was ambitious but struggling, before the billion-dollar companies and ruthless decisions. Their relationship had burned bright, but ended abruptly. She had left without a trace, vanishing as if she had never existed. At the time, he convinced himself it was for the best, another sacrifice on his road to success. But now, standing there watching the boy, doubts gnawed at him. His pulse pounded as his mind raced. The timeline fit too perfectly. If Celeste had been pregnant when she left, Kieran would be about this age now. The uncanny resemblance was impossible to ignore. His first instinct was to approach, but something held him back. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was something more. He needed to know the truth before making a move. Orlan left the gala early, but his mind never left that ballroom. Back in his penthouse, he sat in his dimly lit study, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk. He had access to the world's best resources, the power to uncover any secret, no matter how deeply buried. His fingers hovered over his phone before finally making the call. A man on the other end answered immediately. "I need a full report on Celeste Myrick, where she's been, what she's been doing, and everything about the boy. I want it fast." The response was swift. "Understood." As the call ended, Orlan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had spent his life believing he had no attachments, no unfinished chapters. But now something from his past had surfaced, something he might not be ready for. If Kieran was truly his son, then the life Orlan had carefully built was about to change in ways he never expected. The morning after the gala, Orlan Vexley sat in his private study, his mind clouded with unanswered questions. The air was heavy with the scent of aged whiskey, though his glass remained untouched. The name Celeste Myrick kept echoing in his mind like a ghost from a past he thought he had buried. He had spent his life ensuring that no one could ever use his past against him, yet here he was, unsettled by the mere presence of a boy who might be his son. Within hours, his private investigator, Callum Pierce, had already started digging. Callum was the kind of man who found answers where others saw dead ends. His methods were quiet but effective, and Orlan trusted him with the most delicate matters. When the first report landed on Orlan's desk, the information was more disturbing than he had anticipated. Celeste had spent the past 17 years living under different aliases, moving from city to city without a clear pattern. She had never stayed in one place for more than a few years, each time changing her identity as if she were running from something or someone. There were no marriage records, no long-term employment, nothing that suggested a normal life. But the most alarming detail was a connection to a man Orlan had not thought about in years, Vance Odrick. 17 years ago, Vance had been an investor with deep ties to the underbelly of the business world. He was ambitious but reckless, the kind of man who played dangerous games with dangerous people. Orlan had once considered him an ally, but as his company grew, he realized that Vance was more liability than asset. Their professional relationship ended abruptly when Vance disappeared without a trace. No body, no evidence, no police investigation. He simply ceased to exist. Some whispered that he had fled, others believed he had been silenced. Either way, Orlan had moved on, never looking back. But now, buried within Celeste's past, was an alarming detail. She had been seen with Vance Odrick shortly before he vanished. Surveillance footage from years ago placed them together at a secluded property just days before his disappearance. What had they been discussing? Why had she been there? And more importantly, had Celeste played a role in whatever had happened to him? The deeper Callum searched, the more troubling the details became. There were financial transactions linking Celeste to offshore accounts. Money moved in ways that suggested she had been hiding something significant. A paper trail led to a storage unit registered under one of her aliases. Whatever secrets Celeste had been keeping, they were locked away. Somewhere inside, Orlan sat in silence, absorbing the weight of the discovery. If Celeste had been running for all these years, what had she been running from? And if Kieran was his son, had she kept him hidden for his protection or to protect herself? The thought sent an uneasy shiver down his spine. Later that evening, a new detail emerged. Callum had tracked down someone from Celeste's past, a former landlord who remembered her well. The man spoke of a woman who was constantly looking over her shoulder, someone who paid her rent in cash and never allowed anyone to get too close. She had lived there with a young boy, but one day, without warning, she vanished. No goodbye, no explanation. The only thing left behind was a note slipped under the door. "It's not safe anymore." Something was very wrong. Just as Orlan was beginning to process the implications, a package arrived at his estate. The envelope was unmarked, the paper inside slightly yellowed with age. He unfolded it carefully, his pulse steady but alert. The message was brief, written in uneven strokes. "Stop looking. The past is dead. Walk away before you bury yourself." With it, a single drop of dried blood stained the corner of the paper. Orlan Vexley sat in his study, the letter resting on his desk like a silent threat. The words were direct, ominous, and laced with an unmistakable warning. Someone knew he was searching for answers. Someone wanted him to stop. The dried blood on the corner of the page only deepened his unease. Was it a scare tactic, or had it come from someone who had already paid the price for digging too deep? But Orlan was not a man easily intimidated. If anything, the letter only solidified his determination. He needed confirmation, concrete proof that Kieran was his son. Speculation wasn't enough. He arranged for a discreet DNA test, instructing Callum to obtain a sample without raising suspicion. Within days, a strand of Kieran's hair, taken from a brush left behind at the gala, was sent to one of the most discreet genetic testing facilities in the country. The results would take time, but Orlan was patient. While waiting, he focused on the larger puzzle. The threats, Celeste's disappearance, and the resurfacing of Vance Odrick's name all pointed to something deeper. Someone had been controlling the narrative for years, ensuring that Celeste remained hidden, ensuring that no one, especially Orlan, ever looked too closely. Callum continued investigating, retracing Celeste's movements over the years. What he uncovered added another, disturbing layer. A pattern had emerged. Every place Celeste had lived, every city she had disappeared from, was tied to the financial interests of one of Vance Odrick's former associates. Whether it was real estate, shell corporations, or hidden accounts, there was an undeniable connection. It was becoming clear that Celeste hadn't just been hiding. She had been running from something or someone connected to Odrick. And now, by searching for her, Orlan had put himself in the crosshairs. Days passed, each one weighed down with uncertainty. Then the results arrived. Orlan sat alone as he opened the envelope, his breath steady, but his heart hammering against his ribs. The words were clinical, devoid of emotion, but they carried a weight unlike anything he had ever experienced. Probability of paternity. 99% Kieran was his son. For a man who had spent his life controlling every aspect of his world, the revelation was disorienting. A son he never knew existed had been out there, growing up without him, shaped by a life he had no part in. The resemblance wasn't just a coincidence. It was proof of a bond that had been severed before it even had a chance to form. But there was no time to dwell on the emotions that threatened to surface. As Orlan processed the reality of his connection to Kieran, another envelope arrived, as if the sender had been waiting for this moment. This one was smaller, more deliberate. Inside was a single photograph. It was Celeste. The image was grainy, taken from a distance. She was stepping out of a car, her face partially obscured by dark sunglasses. The timestamp on the bottom suggested it was taken within the last 24 hours. Someone had found her, scrawled across the back in the same jagged handwriting. As the previous letter were 3 words: "She is next." Orlan clenched his jaw, his grip tightening around the paper. Whoever was pulling the strings had made a mistake. They had underestimated him. For the first time in years, the past had come, knocking, and this time, Orlan wasn't walking away. Orlan Vexley had always believed that power meant control, yet the situation unfolding before him was slipping through his fingers like sand. The DNA test had confirmed what he already suspected. Kieran was his son. But before he had time to process the revelation, another message arrived, this time more direct than the last. The grainy photograph of Celeste, the words, "She is next," scrawled across the back, sent a cold fury through him. Someone had found her, and if the warning was real, she was running out of time. He instructed Callum to track Celeste immediately. Using the location data from the photograph's timestamp, Callum pinpointed the last known area where the picture had been taken, an industrial zone outside Chicago. It was a place where no one stayed for long, a transit point for people who wanted to disappear. Celeste had been careful all these years, but someone had finally caught up with her. Determined to get to her first, Orlan sent his private jet ahead while he took a separate route to avoid suspicion. By the time he arrived, Callum was already on site, searching for any signs of her whereabouts. The area was desolate. Abandoned warehouses, crumbling infrastructure, and streets lined with businesses that operated in the shadows. It was the kind of place where deals were made and people vanished without a trace. Then they found it. Celeste's car was parked behind an old shipping depot, its driver's side door slightly ajar. The engine was cold, which meant she had been there for a while, but she wasn't inside. The only thing left behind was her phone, shattered on the ground beside the vehicle. The screen flickered, barely functioning, but one message remained, visible. Too late. A chill spread through Orlan's veins. The words weren't a warning. They were a statement. Celeste was gone. For the first time in years, a deep, unfamiliar fear settled in his chest. He had built an empire, crushed his enemies, and outmaneuvered the most ruthless minds in business, yet in this moment, he was powerless. He had already lost Celeste once. He wouldn't lose her again. But there was something more pressing now, Kieran. If someone had taken Celeste, that meant Kieran was in danger too. Orlan wasted no time. He called his security team and ordered them to extract the boy immediately. His estate was well guarded, but it was no longer enough. He had underestimated the forces at play, and he wasn't going to make that mistake again. When the team arrived at Kieran's school, they found his seat empty. He had been there earlier in the day, but at some point between classes he had walked out. Security footage showed him leaving on his own, his movements calm, calculated, too deliberate for a teenager simply skipping class. Someone had contacted him. Someone had told him to leave. The next few hours were a blur of dead ends and unanswered questions. Calls to his known acquaintances turned up nothing. No one had seen him. No one had spoken to him. He had vanished just like his mother. Then a message arrived. Unlike the previous threats, this one was sent directly to Orlan's personal phone. No number, no name, just a single line of text. A father always reclaims his own. Orlan's grip tightened around the phone as he read the words over and over. The meaning was clear. Vance Odrick was alive, and he had Kieran. Orlan Vexley had spent his life mastering the art of control, but as he stared at the message on his phone, he felt something he hadn't in years: helplessness. Vance Odrick was alive, the man who had vanished without a trace nearly 2 decades. Ego, the man Orlan had assumed was either dead or irrelevant, had resurfaced. And he had Kieran. The words, "a father always reclaims his own," twisted like a knife in Orlan's mind. Vance wasn't just back, he was claiming Kieran as his. The implications were sickening. Had Celeste been running from Vance all these years? Had she hidden Kieran not from Orlan, but from a man who had spent nearly 2 decades hunting them? If Vance believed Kieran was his son, it meant he had been obsessed with Celeste long before she disappeared. Orlan had no time to unravel the past. He needed to act. Callum worked relentlessly, tracing the message's origin. It had been routed, through layers of encryption, bouncing across multiple locations, but one detail stood out. The signal had briefly surfaced in a remote region outside Chicago, the same area where Celeste had disappeared. There was no coincidence here. Orlan prepared for war. His security team gathered intelligence, while Callum pinpointed a potential location, a secluded estate on the outskirts of the city. The property was registered under a shell company linked to Odrick's former associates. It was the perfect place to keep someone hidden. As the convoy approached the estate, Orlan's mind raced. He had never hesitated before, never questioned himself, but this was different. He wasn't securing a business deal or eliminating a corporate threat. He was walking into a situation where the stakes were far more personal. His team moved quickly, neutralizing security cameras and disabling alarms. The property was surrounded by dense trees, making visibility difficult. They breached the front entrance with military precision, sweeping through the rooms. Then Orlan heard it, a single muffled voice coming from a locked room down the hallway. He reached the door and forced it open. Kieran sat in a chair, his wrists loosely bound, his expression unreadable. He looked up, his icy blue eyes meeting Orlan's. There was no fear, only a quiet calculation. "You came," Kieran said, his voice steady. Orlan barely had time to process the words before movement in the shadows caught his attention. Vance Odrick stepped into the light. Time had not been kind to him. His once sharp features were worn with age, his skin weathered, but his eyes burned with a dangerous intensity. He looked at Orlan and smiled. "You always were predictable." Orlan felt the weight of the moment settle between them. He had spent years thinking Odrick was gone. Yet here he was, alive and standing before him, acting as if the past 17 years had been part of some grand design. "This isn't your game to play," Orlan said coldly. Odrick chuckled, shaking his head. "You still don't see it, do you? Kieran isn't just your son. He's mine, too." The words sent a wave of fury through Orlan, but he kept his expression unreadable. "Celeste lied to you," Odrick continued. "She took what was mine and ran. I've spent years searching, waiting for the right moment, and now here we are." Orlan saw through the manipulation. This wasn't about fatherhood, it was about possession, control. Whatever twisted fantasy Odrick had built in his mind, Orlan wasn't going to entertain it. In one swift motion, Orlan's team moved in, overpowering Odrick before he could react. There was no struggle. The fight had left him long ago. Kieran stood, brushing himself off as the restraints fell away. He looked at Orlan for a long moment, then nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the truth they both now understood. As they walked out of the estate together, Orlan knew his life had changed, forever. He had reclaimed his son, but more than that, he had uncovered the darkest parts of a past that refused to stay buried.